My name is Dr. Barbara Spees, and I teach at Cardinal Stritch University, a Franciscan Catholic university. I'm working on a project right now on Franciscan preaching, and I got to have the conversation with Father Sergius that I wanted to share with you. So I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I have. So what I wanted to know about is, the broader picture is about Franciscans have this history of being very popular preachers.
Yeah.
You know, people want to hear the Franciscans preach. Yeah. And this seems to me from the beginning, right, that, you know, even in Francis's time, that the parish priests weren't happy because the Franciscans were so popular. Yeah. So I just want to ask you a few questions, and well, the first one is, when did you become a friar? What year?
1940.
1940, okay.
That's 74 years ago.
Ah, you're coming up on an anniversary. How old were you then?
How old was I then?
When you became a friar?
That's a good question. I think I was 20.
And are you from this area, or?
I'm from Chicago.
Chicago, okay.
Near north side Chicago. When you get out of the loop and you're traveling on the highway, you'll see St. John Cantius on the one side, the east side. That's where I was baptized, and Holy Trinity on the west side. That's where I went to grade school.
And when you went into the friars, did you know right away that you wanted to be a priest?
I felt at that time that I wanted to be a priest. I felt the call, even though the family was kind of dysfunctional, and they were struggling to make ends meet. You know, in those days, a guy made $5 a week. Of course, the dollar meant a lot more than it does today, but still, we bought a house, $3,000. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
What the heck was I talking about?
Deciding to become a priest.
I actually talked, and my parents didn't really want that at all because, you know, they felt the need of my support, financial support. Eventually, my dad got a job with the Bell Telephone, and that was a big deal in those days. As a maintenance man, his specialty was shoemaking. He actually made shoes for army people because he was in the Austrian army before the World War, which began in 1914. He left the country in 1912, just in time. I don't know if he knew anything politically, whether he foresaw it. My mother had 3 years schooling, that's all. My father, I don't know, didn't have much more.
Was she also from Austria?
No, they were from the portion of Poland that was under Austria, because Poland was divided. Russia had one part, Austria another, and Germany another. They were split up like that for over 130 years. And after the First World War, they finally got a chance because of Paderewski, the great pianist, who was a worldwide known, and he had a lot of political influence for some reason or other. So they finally got their freedom, but that didn't last long because then Nazis came in and took over, and then after the Nazis fell apart and the communists came over, it was just a mess.
Have you been to Poland?
Oh, when I was 20 years in South Africa.
Yes, Father Kim was telling me about that.
Yeah, together with Sister Madge, who is now the president of the College of St. Augustine, a college that was deep in the hole because of mismanagement, and now she's got the terrible job of trying to, revive it. Anyhow, with her and John, who is a member of the Franciscans of Renewal That's Benedict Rochelle's group. He's actually situated in Bronx, and he's a superior, and he also deals with the homeless. So that's where he is, and myself, the three of us. That's a whole long story.
And that was 20 years, you said? You were in South Africa 20 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was promoting Bible reading among the laity, as well as giving retreats, missions, and parishes. I mean, the whole works.
It's a lot of stuff.
Well, I've been preaching 67 years, and I'm still going strong.
Wow. And was preaching a main reason for wanting to become a priest, or?
No, I didn't think about that at all. I didn't know what my role was going to be, what my charism is, until I got here, and I was studying theology in 1944. And one day I was walking, but there were two buildings. There was one upstairs that was demolished about a year ago, because we're 7 people. You don't need 2 buildings, you know. Anyhow, we had theology there, and I was teaching it. No, I was a student at that time, 1944. I was a student. And one day I was reading the John Chrysostom's sermons. And as I was reading it, I caught fire. I knew from that moment that was my charism. In fact, that's how it turned out. I was actually a professor for 22 years in the seminary. And I taught a variety of subjects for the simple reason that they needed somebody. So, for instance, I started off by teaching moral theology because the guy just ran away. He left the community. So then they finally sent me to Catholic University for 1 year to get some knowledge, postgraduate knowledge. And when I came back, at the moment I came back, the scripture professor had a heart attack and died. They said, "Who's going to teach scripture?" He says, "You take it." "Okay, I'll take it." So now I taught scripture. Then when he was sent for further studies, and when he was prepared and came back, he said, "Well, he'll teach that now. You teach church history." So now I taught church history. You won't believe it. I have taught more subjects. And one of the first subjects I taught in theology, I was one of the professors, was homiletics.
Well, see, there it is.
Homiletics. Now, I never expected that, and I remember one book, because in those days there were very few books on homiletics. Now, oh man, this is science. It's a science. I know a priest who actually got a doctorate in homiletics, because there's so many angles to it. You study the emotions of a person, the listeners as well as yourself. You see yourself on a television thing. They in other words, they photo you. So, and that's the best thing they can do. It's the best thing that you can do, because you don't have to criticize the guy. When the guy sees himself on that picture, although sometimes he'll be in denial and just won't pay attention, but that's stupid. That's stupid, really. At any rate, the one thing that stood out in my mind was when you give a sermon or do anything by way of teaching, talk about one thing that's important. I never lost sight of that. When I preach, people remember what I said because I said one thing. That's a very important point. Because the tendency is, he covers the gospel, he covers this, and he talks from one thing to another. Nobody knows what did he say? I don't know. He just talked a long time. You gotta have one thing, and secondly, you have to know how to use the microphone and be very critical of yourself. Have somebody check out. Some churches are impossible. I remember I gave a homily in some church in Chicago with high ceilings, old church, but a beautiful church, a Gothic structure. Nobody could hear me even in the first pews. There's nothing you could do about it, And then when they build new churches lately, the last thing they think about is acoustics. That should be the first thing they should think about. Well, maybe not the first thing, but it's a very important thing, because otherwise there's no communication between the presider and the one in the... Hey, where am I going? I mean...
No, this is beautiful. I love that. Well, you were talking about teaching homiletics.
Oh, but anyhow, that's when I discovered my charism. I knew I had that, and I have been totally devoted to that. Even when I teach, I preach. I suppose that's just, that's my personality. And it, in a way, there's an entertaining aspect to it, which is important. Because nowadays, if you don't entertain at the same time when you're giving a serious lecture or preaching, it won't stick. People are interested in entertainment. They want that. They can't live without it. They demand it.
Or they walk away. Was there someone who you saw as a role model for preaching, someone that you patterned your preaching after?
Well, we all had a role model at that time, and that was Bishop Sheen.
Oh, okay.
And he was really a great role model. He had some humor, but he also entertained. He was an actor. The only thing he wasn't is a singer. I was shocked. When I heard him sing, he couldn't hold a note.
Oh, no.
And I asked myself, how could a man with such a good voice not be able to sing? But it's a question of, I don't know what it is a question of, but he just could not sing. But he was the role model.
And did you hear him on the radio?
I even hear him nowadays, although now I don't drive anymore. I renounced it because I'm 96 and I had a couple of little accidents, and I thought, this is crazy. This is not good. And I said, I'm finished. I didn't renew my license in March. That was it. That's why you saw them bringing me here. What did you ask me?
I asked you if you heard him on the radio, or did you see him in person ever?
No, I never saw him in person.
Where was he? Was he in New York, or?
He was stationed mostly in New York, although for a period of time he was the Bishop of Richmond, somewhere in New York, and I don't know whether that's in New Jersey or whatever.
And he was also on TV as well as on the radio?
Oh, his television programs were so good that even the comic, what's his name, famous comic, told jokes. I have a book of his, 12,000 jokes. Burl.
Okay.
Milton Berle. Milton Berle was competing with him. He actually made such a tremendous impression on audiences that even kids would watch him. The family had to watch. Usually Catholics in those days were, serious about religion. Many of them, good number of them. And on Sundays, they all gathered around, going to listen to Bishop Sheen, and he had this cape, and he came in like, what do you call that guy who flies through the air?
Like Superman?
Yeah, Superman.
That's wonderful. How did, coming from the experience of fraternity, of being a brother, affect how you preached? Do you think your preaching is formed by that, in addition to some of the role models or the reading?
Actually, the most difficult kind of preaching you can do is to your own, especially if it's the family, and this is a family, Then I go into a seminary, Holy Cross, in Notre Dame, because we had the Holy Cross Fathers at Holy Trinity. And that was a great place to be. I saw every football game except one in 4 years. Not too many basketball games because we had to study, so they couldn't go out at night and all that kind of thing, But, and I learned Greek, Latin. It was great. But not relating. I didn't have any, at those days the professors were there, you were here, there was not that. So I was living at a time when religious life was rigid. Any intimacy was regarded as particular friendships, they used to call those, as a bad thing. Well, it can be a bad thing, and in many instances it is, but that's beside the point. So it took a long time. I had to go through a lot of that, and even with my own. I won't go into all that. Because I'm just saying that I had a lot to deal with as a professor. Although to some I was liked, and others didn't like me. I suppose they didn't like. See, I can be very authoritarian. I have this commanding style. My voice is just perfect for that, for a commanding style. Some people say, he's got the voice of God. Really, when you see that shrine, well, I was invited to be the voice of God when they give him the commandments.
Wow.
They picked me out because I preached there once in a while, in fact, quite a bit. And so I have that commanding style, and that is not a good thing in this day and age. Because in this day and age, you have to be a kind of a person that invites dialogue. My personality is not that kind. I mean in preaching. I don't mean in conversation. Although in preaching, I'm letting my hair down. And for instance, just a couple of weeks ago, people got up and applauded.
Wow.
Now, frankly, I don't know why they applauded, because I didn't think I said anything unusual. Maybe they applauded because such an old man has such passion about things, and that's an important thing. You got to have passion if you're a preacher. I never lost it. I never lost it. Now, it's a passion because I have a relationship with the Lord. It's special. And it began when I was 19, because I had an experience. But I won't go into that. I'm just mentioning it because this has to do with preaching. That's why I have never lost the zeal and never lost the passion. So the two things that I would emphasize is, first of all, you got to talk about one thing. That's got to be organized. You got a way to introduce it so that people take notice of what you're going to say. You got to let them know in the beginning what you're going to talk about, and then you got to tell them at the end what you talked about. But that end should be a special way of saying it. For instance, I use a poem oftentimes, like this morning. I ended with a poem. And it just kind of, it's beauty, so it makes its impression. Second thing, passion. You've got to have passion. Third thing, you've got to study philosophy and get to be able to analyze the times. What's going on in the world? For instance, in our time, religion is being sidetracked. It's secularism that is taking over. They don't want to give public square to religion. Now, here we do have some of that, but in other countries they have none of that. It's gone. They don't want it. Like Euro nations. But you've got to study what's going on, and you have to read the papers, and you've got to watch television, and you've got to be able to size up what images people have. I have to talk to children at the St. John's, but I never talk more than 2 minutes. And I just say one thing. If I could give you an example of, I can't think of anything at the moment, but I just say something startling, and then make just one point and end it. Don't drag it out. The span of attention span is so small now because the people are so stimulated constantly, all the time. They don't even have time to think. They don't even take the time to think. So you got to take, you got to understand what's going on, what is needed, and all that.
When you talk about when you brought a poem for the end or something like that, do you write out things for your homily?
Oh, I always, everything I preach, I type out. I don't write it out because I write it out and then I type it. But that's because I can't read my own writing.
That's kind of hard.
So, yes, I always type it out, and I insist on that. For one, it's clear. The clarity is there. Secondly, the order is there. And thirdly, I have to take into account my limitations. I don't have a good memory, In fact, I remember when I was attending DePaul University back in 38 and 39. That was a small place in those days. Now it's the biggest university, Catholic university.
It is,
yeah. What was I going to say?
About
Oh, I was a student there. So some guy was making he was trying to write about memory, a dissertation on memory, and he was testing people. And he tested my memory, and he said, geez, it's surprising. He said, you have high marks, but your memory is not just ordinary. It's not great. It isn't great, see. So I have to do that. But that doesn't mean that I just stand there and read it. It's mine. And I don't hesitate to get away from it, but not too far, because I want to stay to the order. I don't want to go off on a tangent, because then you're really not helping people. It's distracting them from the main point. You got to keep your eye on the ball, as they say.
Do you save your homilies?
Yeah, well, I do, because even though I'll never use the thing exactly the same way. I always, change. Pardon me. Whatever I always do that. And my sermons now are better than anything I wrote in those days. But I've written a number of books. My books don't sell because I don't have a good marketing. The Alba House publication house is a small thing in New York. One of the burgs of New York. What is the name of it? Brooklyn, Manhattan. What's the other one?
Bronx.
Not the Bronx.
Queens.
Not the Queens.
I don't know.
Well, that's the one. That's the one where Alba House
I'm
is.
from California, so I don't know any of that stuff.
Okay. Anyhow, that publisher, and then I've done. I have CDs, 3 CDs, 24 in discs in each, cover the whole Bible.
Wow.
I have a DVD on the whole of the Catechism, cover the whole thing. So I've gone into that, but the marketing is not what it should be.
Yeah. Now, we were talking in the very beginning.
Oh, and I was in radio.
Oh, really?
In South Africa, they have Radio Veritas. And I was a regular on that. There was a kind of a rosary and a homily and that kind of thing. And then that's where I gave my whole series on the whole Bible. I actually rendered that on Radio Veritas, and then they put all that together. And